Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the Ghost Forest reception. I'm Karen McGlathery, a professor of environmental sciences at UVA and lead of the Virginia Coast Reserve Long-Term Ecological Research Program, which is based on the Eastern Shore at UVA's Coastal Research Center in Oyster. I'm also the director of the Environmental Resilience Institute at UVA, which is hosting this event in partnership with the Office of Engagement. ERI is the hub of sustainability and resilience research at UVA, and it spearheads projects that are interdisciplinary, that are solutions-oriented, and that are engaged with communities. This evening's reception is the first in a series of 6 events in our Climate Ambition Summit that will occur over the next 2 weeks. We're really pleased to have with us this evening artists and scientists who have collaborated on the virtual Ghost Forest exhibit, and I hope you've had a chance to explore it. If not, we'll share the link after this event. I wanted to spend just a couple minutes describing what ghost forests are. So ghost forests are appearing all along our coast as a sign of climate change. They're the result of rising seas and salt marshes migrating inland. This is a natural process that has occurred over millennia, but it's now happening faster with climate change and with accelerated sea level rise. As the seas rise, salt water seeps into the groundwater and young trees die, and seeds can no longer germinate. The salt-tolerant marsh plants become established, and eventually the older trees will succumb. And so this transition can be gradual, but events like hurricanes can also accelerate the process. So these lingering dead trees, like you see on my background screen here, are a sentinel of climate change. But I would also point out that ghost forests are also a sign of resilience. They show how marshes migrate inland rather than drowning, and in that way, I think of them as a sign of hope. So when I visited the Ghost Forest exhibit, one of the things I thought about was how, as both scientists and artists, our work is based on observation, but that we have different ways of seeing and knowing, and we have a lot to learn from each other. So collaborations like the Ghost Forest exhibit deepen our understanding and our imagination about what we can do together to create a better future in the face of climate change that's occurring on our coasts. So now I'm going to pass the program on to Cora Baird. Cora is a site director of UVA's Coastal Research Center, and she'll introduce the project and provide you with some information about the format of the breakout rooms. I hope you enjoy the event.
Thank you, Karen. So first of all, it is raining here, so I apologize if there are any lags in the internet, but welcome everyone. We're really glad that you can join us. And I wanted to start by pointing out that this project, this collaboration, really connects to the fact that we're realizing more and more that recognizing the impacts of climate change and learning how to live with them is a learning process for all of us. And that the creep of sea level rise, we know impacts vast areas of low-lying coastal land, but many of us who live on the coast, including all of the artists here and some of us scientists, and I think many of those of you attending, even though it impacts the areas where we live, many of us have trouble naming specific ways that we see those impacts on the landscape. So this project came about in part because we started conversations with the art community on the Eastern Shore of Virginia. And when we talked to the artists, part of what we heard was that they were interested not only in collaborating with us to explore the ecosystems, but even more so to be able to access a scientific way of seeing those places, to see the place where they live in a new way. And so what we did is we paired that request with the realization that ghost forests are a really captivating sign of coastal change, and that for many of us, those are hiding in our midst. Ghost forests are really one of those things that once you learn to see them, you start seeing them everywhere. And so we envision this project as an opportunity to collaboratively explore the coastal edge while sharing the sentinels of coastal change with our communities, helping to make these more visible to the people that we live with. So the artists of the Eastern Shore, as Karen mentioned, are already really keen observers of the coast. They absolutely capture and document the coast more than anyone. So this project really simply brought a new subject into focus. So by exploring the resulting artwork, hopefully you've had a chance to look through the gallery, and if you haven't, there will be some time tonight or after our reception. Hopefully by hearing the artists' experiences during this project and having access to some of us who contributed the science, We hope that this evening will provide you with a new experience in ways that you see and contemplate our changing coasts. So with that, I will give you a very brief idea of how the evening will proceed, and then we will move into rooms to start discussions. So tonight we'll be dividing you into small breakout rooms for conversations with artists and scientists. You will receive an invitation box on your Zoom screen. So you simply need to accept that to be moved into your breakout room. And we'll have about 15 minutes together before you are moved to another room where we'll meet a new artist and a new scientist. And we'll continue to rotate until about 8:10 when we'll be brought back together.
Hello, everyone. We'll let everybody join us. We invite folks to turn their cameras on. This is a very casual opportunity for us to be able to get together. I'll let the others join us. And as we're moving through, we'll get cameras on, but we'll ask folks, here we go. We'll get people in the room. Let me start. So my name is Elizabeth Muse, and I'm going to be your room coordinator or your docent, as you could think about this in this little gallery environment. And what we're going to do is our group is going to stay together in this wonderful room. And then we're going to actually have different artists and different scientists join us at different times as we move through. So you get to relax in, you don't have to go. I'm going to go ahead and make an introduction to our artist, for our scientist. We have some artwork that you can look at, and then this is an open conversation. So again, we invite you to turn your cameras on, and then in just a little bit, we will absolutely invite you to ask questions as well. So again, I'm Elizabeth Muse with the UVA Clubs program. I would like to introduce first our artist, Miriam Riggs. She is a multimedia artist living in Onancock, Virginia. Her subjects are flora and fauna of the Eastern Shore, depicted in adaptations of classical and primitive styles. Her art is based on deep observation and helps share an awareness of place with her audience. Miriam, thank you so much for joining us. The wonderful scientist that we have with us today is Karen Gadan. She is an assistant professor and biological scientist at George Washington University. She holds a degree from Tufts and Brown. Karen is a coastal ecologist who researches the response of tidal marsh and nearshore uplands to accelerate sea level, and she works at the Virginia Coast Reserve and other locations in the Mid-Atlantic region. So getting us started this evening, Miriam and Karen, Miriam, would you like to show some of your original art pieces, the art pieces that we have, or dive right into questions?
Sure, I'd be happy to show some of my work, and that will probably elicit some questions, hopefully, once the participants can see where we're going. So if you'd like to just go ahead and select something.
That sounds wonderful. I'll share my screen. Just one moment.
Okay.
And here we have, so let's go from the beginning.
Yes, this is called Ghosts of Broadway, and this is a ghost forest that's actually located at the end of my road where I live. This is about a half mile from my house. Are you going to show more, or would you like for me to discuss this particular? Okay, and this one is called Reclining Cedar. Again, this is an example of a scene very close to my home. And this one's called Babes in the Marsh. This is actually on my deeded property. And this type of scene is something that endeared me to the property when I had no idea what I was really looking at 20 years ago when I bought the property. I just thought the silvered and dying cedar trees out in the marsh were beautiful aesthetically. I was not tuned in to what a ghost forest was at that time. And this is a piece I called Salt and Fresh. It's a floor cloth. It measures 10 by 12 feet. And it looks perhaps like a traditional Oriental rug, but if you look closer, there are details of animals at, both on large scale and microscopic scale that inhabit the area where I live. They're stylized, but they're put into this Oriental rug format. And I can talk about that in more detail later, but yeah, here you'll see some details of the types of animals that inhabit this area. And you can see a diamondback in the lower border area. You can see a diamondback terrapin, some hydroids, and barnacles are there, little jellyfish, small fish of different kinds. But these are things that I actually observe on my property.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm so glad that we were able to start with some of the artwork so that everyone can get an idea of your work. And moving into it, let me just launch with one of the questions that we had, and then Karen and Miriam, you can talk more, and then in a little bit, we'll take some questions from the audience as well. So one of the things, we saw one of your really big paintings, and if for those, when you can get out to go to the gallery out on the Eastern Shore, it is really, really large. And it's a really uncommon perspective. Can you talk about the ghost forests and what led you to do a perspective that was quite such a large piece?
I just wanted to convey the atmosphere of the ghost forest, because while it appears to be, clearly it's, if you're looking for trees, you'd look at the trees and go, oh, those trees are dead. However, when I see them, I also see the life that's captured even in the dying forms, because the trees are shaped by the natural forces around them, such as the wind. And they seem a little strained. They, a lot of the trees, even the pine trees, they take on a similar aspect, I think, because of the natural elements that are shaping them. And so, yes, that painting is kind of an immersion. I wanted it to have an immersive effect. And it also has many other life forms incorporated in it, including fiddler crabs around the edge, and periwinkles in the border there. And then there's a red-headed woodpecker flying through, and there are quite a number of woodpeckers that are attracted to the ghost forests here because of the insects that must enjoy the dying trees. And so as one ecosystem transforms, these other creatures are there in great numbers. And I just wanted to show that.
Thanks, Miriam. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned your scene was just a half-mile down the road, and I know that your house is right adjacent to a ghost forest. And I was wondering how the location of your home and seeing the ghost forests on almost a daily basis kind of shaped your work and shaped your understanding of the ghost forest.
Well, thanks for asking that. I moved here 20 years ago, and at that time I had no awareness of ghost forest or no particular focus on sea level rise in general. And yet since I've been here, I have surely changed my life, and my awareness has grown exponentially from being immersed in this. And so I don't know if I'm getting right toward the question. Could you kind of direct me a little bit again as to the specific focus?
Well, I guess there's two things. One, I'd love to hear more about what changes you've seen on your property in the 20 years. And then also sort of how seeing the ghost forest in different conditions, flood and ebb and storm and sun and things like that, maybe might have shaped your art.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And I have had to make a number of adaptations, and it's been very difficult because there's recurrent flooding here. And I quickly, after 6 months in this property, I experienced major flooding. And even at that point, I was very endeared to the landscape. I've known this marsh for a long time before I moved here. And I guess I came here for to get closer to nature, because I love nature, and I moved out of town so I could be closer to the marsh. I didn't realize the huge trade-off I was making when I invested all my cash savings in a property like this. But I immediately had to, within a couple of years, I did have to have my house raised up, physically raised up on a 4-foot foundation to make it resilient to the flooding. And so I've later on, I had to move my studio up as well and build a new studio, which was on a higher level. And this makes me a little unnerved at times. And yet now I can have a calmer, a more calm view of the marsh, and I'm not quite as frightened of the rising sea levels, and I'm able to sit back and again enjoy the aesthetics and the wonder of this extremely dynamic landscape. And so I've sought to incorporate that into the subject matter of my work, because I like to give my work meaning. It's not just about aesthetics. It's about a higher meaning, and it's about documenting a specific time and place. And that is what will give my work vitality over a longer period of time. And then backed up with the scientific knowledge that I'm continuing to gain through experiences like this Ghost Forest Collective, I hope to allow my work to grow with my increasing awareness, and to show the changes in the types of animals. For example, when I first moved here, there were far more frogs than there are now. And I'm disappointed to lose the frog populations, because I just love amphibians. However, the amphibians don't fare so well in this salty environment. That's one of those trade-offs that I've experienced. So now I'm going to have to find other animals that are equally as fascinating, but are not of amphibious types. That's just one example.
That's awesome. I feel a little jealous of your ability to see the marsh and the ghost forest every single day, and all those changes. It's really amazing. I want to definitely invite the group here to ask questions. So there's a raise your hand and the reactions at the bottom of your screen, or you can just unmute and ask a question. Does anyone want to head that off?
I'd like to ask a question about how the changing of the seasons affects you and the environment, and how you incorporate that in your artwork. I'm very interested in that, living on the Rivanna Reservoir River, and I have done some paintings of the changing of the seasons, and I wonder what it's like for you.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. For one thing, there are periods of flooding at different times of year, specifically in the spring and the fall. There are particularly high tides, and the high tides inundate this land. In fact, my yard, it's not unusual for the yard, or for surely the road in front of the house, to become inundated with water. And it causes me to see different things that are exciting. Sometimes, for example, during a recent flooding event, I guess that was last fall, I found a box turtle floating in the floodwaters. I love box turtles. They really mean a lot to me. They're just beautiful creatures, but I found one floating in the floodwaters. And so that inspired me, because he seemed resilient. I mean, I didn't know whether to interfere with and carry that turtle to higher water, or to higher ground, or to let nature take its course and allow that animal to float away. I made the decision to carry it to higher ground. But then it moved me. When I have that kind of experience, then I want to document that. And I use photography to document these type of weather events, and then later depict them in my work. And sometimes I will use it by repeating certain subject matter over a period of time, things that happen repeatedly. I like the number of box turtles I see. I'll have photos. I'll note the dates of those photos, and I will. And the more, if I see something repeatedly from year to year, the same turtles, I will document that through photography and then through my paintings, generally on floor cloths. That's just one example.
And we just got the 2-minute mark. Karen, do you have a quick question? Because you also raised your hand, and then the artists are I'm gonna have to move them. But Karen, yes. Karen Gumser-Smith?
Yes, I have a couple questions. One, are you on Seaside, Miriam, or Bayside?
Yeah, I'm on the Bayside, right at the mouth of Onancock Creek.
Right. Okay.
And so it's just right where the bay hits the sea. I mean, the mouth of the creek hits the bay. Yeah, about 500 feet from there.
Been to Onancock. I love that area. Oh, I can't remember what else I was going to ask at the moment.
And you know what, we're going to have to, we'll have opportunities later, but I'm going to have to move Kieran and Miriam to another room.
And hello now to Buck, Helene, and Karen. Welcome to Gallery C.
Hello.
We're glad to have you. Excuse me, everyone. Okay, so I will do our introductions and then offer an opening question and turn it over to our group of artists and scientists. So Buck Dowdy is an Eastern Shore metal artist who creates original metal sculptures, welded, pounded, and ground to shape, excuse me, from raw steel material. His art combines his skill as an industrial welder with the region's deep history of sculpture. His work can be found under the name Hog Island Creations, a nod to his ancestors in the region. And when he's not welding, he provides facility support to the Coastal Research Center. And Helene is a photographer whose work is inspired by the Eastern Shore and its breathtaking nature and coastal environments. The quote back roads that she has explored since coming to the shore from Paris in the 1980s are captured in her images. She creates reactionary art photography pieces as vessels for thought and discussion. And Dr. Karen McGlathery is a professor of environmental sciences and director of the Environmental Resilience Institute at UVA. She has led the long-term ecological research program on the Eastern Shore for nearly 15 years and has studied the area for an even longer period of time. So Buck and Helene, let me ask, would you like me to bring up your images first? Or start with a couple questions here and turn it over to
you can put
you, Karen.
them up.
Yeah, nice to have them up.
Yeah, you can put them up there.
Bring them up? Okay, let me go ahead and do that.
And do we have images from Helen? Helen, do we have images from you as well?
No, I have, no.
Okay.
She originally thought she wouldn't be able to make the...
Right.
Right. So we have Buck's images.
Yeah, give me just one moment.
It's been a good discussion so far.
Good.
There you go.
Did everyone see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Big old busted hackberry tree. Hackberry is one of the last deciduous trees that can grow in the edge of a ghost forest, and it's salt. It seemed to be one of the toughest hardwoods out there, you know, in this kind of landscape. You'll usually see a hackberry in a hot spot of an old sunken island, if it's any dock still out there or whatever.
Sorry, Buck, my screen froze for a moment. Hang on.
Uh-oh.
I hope it's not our poor Eastern Shore internet.
No, I think we're good. Did you see the next image now?
We do.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry.
Big grass. Was it 5 of them you put?
I believe so.
Yeah. That was actually the root of the tree. Yeah, there you go. That was what was left after 80 or 100 years of decay.
And that piece actually, that was an interesting day when we went to look for ghost forests. You know, typically you go on the edge of the seaside or the bayside and you see these tall, long standing, dying bleached trees or dead trees bleached. But in that case, at the edge of the ghost forest were some kind of expanses of marsh with just these trunks, these very short trunks above the marsh that were just the very last remnant of the ghost forest itself, with the roots extending out even 2 to 3 feet, crawling on top of the marsh. Just really interesting.
Exposed. It was really
so
pretty.
he did a sculpture of that, and I took a photo at sunrise of this very last remnant. It was very interesting, beautiful.
Just,
you know,
dead still calm out there, just enough mosquitoes to make it interesting.
We took part in this project to bring awareness to the climate change and to the movements on the Eastern Shore and the fact that ghost forests are more and more. And as I mentioned earlier, it's bringing, it's observing and bringing awareness to the sadness of this impact, but also there is such a beauty in the observation and just the trekking through the ghost forest and the coastal areas of the Eastern Shore and just finding all the beauty there.
I didn't get to tell you this last time about that spot, Karen. I actually worked there when I was 13, 14 years old. It was an old potato farm. And I used to go down that road way back in the day, and it changed so much. We used to dump the potatoes back there in the ghost forest, basically, to get them off of the farm because they were rotten. But there was a spot out there, was a little piece of field they would put them in. And I always liked riding back there, but it was a high road back then. Now it's just, you're right on top of the marsh. It floods when the tide comes in now. So it's all just sunk, over the years. That's been for maybe 35 years, of change that I got to go back and see it and I didn't recognize it. I mean, it was hard to tell.
Well, there are remnants of cattle farming, old fences that are just sitting in the ghost forest.
In the marsh. I mean,
in the marsh,
It's eerie. It's really cool.
So just in 40 years, you've seen the effects of this gradual sea level rise. That's hard to, it's hard to get your head around millimeters per year, but when you see what you've seen over 40 years, fields become marshes and forests become marshes. It's interesting.
Absolutely.
Are there questions from folks out there in the Zoom land?
What was nice about growing up around here, getting into the Ghost Forest project and paying a lot of attention to it here in this last year or two, I've been paying attention to them a long time. I always hiked them and loved them, but I always took it for granted that they were such a unique thing to our location here. Being on the seaside, I always explored them because it was one of the most tranquil places you can find on the shore. Not many people go in them. They're muddy, they're full of bugs, loaded with spiders and snakes and different things. So it's a nice place to go as a kid, to hike around in and camp it. And it's kind of made our heritage on the Eastern Shore. It's a nice thing to be a part of. So
Buck, there's a question in the chat about the, I'm sorry, you can go first, Helen, and then I'll.
No, I was just getting ready to say that there was a question about the metal.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
There was a question about the metals that you use, Buck, in your work and just the process. And maybe you could give just a little background.
It kind of depends on, right, it just depends on the coloration and what I'm making. If it's going to be outside, I'll use some stainless. I use mostly mild steel because mild steel is more malleable. It's It's very easily welded, and it puts off a real nice color. When you blew it with a torch, you get all these nice purples and blues and different things, reds even, that come through on it. So it depends on what I'm after. I weld everything. I weld stainless, aluminum. Don't really mess with copper and bronze too much. It's just a different medium for me. The steel is what I've worked in my whole life, and I can pretty much make anything I want out of it. I got a little horse that I made for my daughter. I took MIG wire and stuck it in a bucket and actually put it all together, welded it into a hunk from the back side. I just wet the whole thing with the sand, and it held it in place for me to get in there with a ground clamp and just tack this all together, and then take a cut wheel and cut the front off of it. I dripped it up one night, and it really does look like wheatgrass. But it just depends on what the idea is.
When did you start doing this, Buck?
2006, I started with the artwork. I've been welding since 1992. 91, I actually went to school to be a welder. I was working junkyards and different things my whole life, and always needed to weld, when I was younger. And it became one of the biggest blessings in my life. It really carried me through all my occupations, and halfway got me the job down there at the LTR. I think they needed a welder. It's landed me a good life. I started with the artwork in 2006 from Danny Dowdy. He's my cousin. He's a really, really respected folk artist. And he had a gallery. He was having shows, and he got me to make some pieces to bring up there, and he sold them for me. And it just started from there. I got commissions. I started going to more shows, and just built up. And the idea is they build on each other. Once you conquer something, you learn something new, you try it, it works. It metamorphosizes into better art as you keep doing it. You just got to challenge yourself to not think it's a dumb idea. You can always throw it away and start over. But if you got something cooking in your head to do it. It's been a successful.
So there's a question for both you and Helen in the chat about from Tucson, where it's dry, far away from the shore, asking if you believe you are supporting not only environmental progress, but also helping sustain shore culture. Do both of you want to talk a little bit about that? Helen, you've been there for a long time, and Buck, you're born here.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about awareness. So we're supporting the environmental message and just bringing awareness to what's going on the Eastern Shore, and the sustainability of the culture. One of my pieces for this Ghost Forest project was this abandoned house in the Ghost Forest, just bringing awareness to the fact that not only is it impacting nature, the sea level rises and the climatic changes, but it's also impacting the civilization here and people that are living on these close coastal areas.
Growing up here, working on the water here, oyster, clams, everything. The crabs, it's all tied together with these ghost forests. It's where they get the nutrient. It's where they get, the creeks, when they change, everything changes with it. And if you see massive amounts of ghost forest being developed, a lot of times, your sediments change, everything changes out there, and you start putting a lot of pressure on the industries that support the shore.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that kind of scares me. And ghost forests are natural, and they happen over a long period of time. But when they happen very fast, it could kill. You could wipe out an oyster rock very easily. It's a very fragile ecosystem.
Yeah, we have one. Okay, sorry to interrupt you. We just have one last question in the chat. I'd like to give, Tim and Deb the opportunity, because I know we're winding down, right, Michael?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, that's right. We have about a minute. Tim and Deb.
Sure, I'll try to be quick. Dr. McGlathery, my wife and I are Virginia Master Naturalists, and we've been following the seagrass restoration project as well down there along the eastern shore. And just wondering if you could quickly speak to what, if any, impact the restoration of those seagrasses will have on the sea level rise, or the slowing the development of the ghost forests, or will it have any impact at all?
Well, the sea level rise is a global issue, and to slow sea level rise, we have to slow the warming. That's really what's causing it. Seagrass have an impact on that because they take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. There's one of nature-based solutions to help mitigate climate change. The actual acreage that we're restoring Virginia is probably not going to slow the sea level rise in Virginia, but it's it's part of the bigger scheme of things. So yeah, it's part of the bigger issue about nature-based solutions and taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And I would love for Buck and Helen to do some artwork on the seagrass, actually.
Oh, no doubt.
The next gallery exhibit.
I do have a seagrass with a seahorse in it.
Yeah.
With his tail wrapped around it.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
It's a tremendous story on the Eastern Shore as well. Thanks for asking about that.
Sure.
Well, Buck, Colleen, and Karen, thank you so much. We've been delighted to be able to chat with all of you, and Buck and Colleen to experience some of your work. So thank you for visiting Gallery C. And
thanks for showing the interest. It's awesome.
I'll move you along to Gallery D in just a moment.
We have been joined by our next set of artists and our next wonderful scientists. So let me go ahead and do the introduction. We have Carola Pearson, an oil painter who lives in the Eastern Shore of Virginia Peninsula. She loves to paint outside and uses these plein air studios as inspiration for larger studio works. She uses a variety of techniques to create illusion of light and atmosphere, and she sells her work through galleries and art shows. And we have Dr. Elliott White, who is a postdoctoral researcher with the Environmental Resilience Institute. His research investigates the environmental and socioeconomic effects of climate change in the coastal margin. He has studied and mapped ghost forests across the Gulf and Atlantic coasts. Thank you both so much for joining us. And Carola, we started last time with some of the artwork. How would you like to do that? Would you like us to show your pieces and then we'll move into the discussion?
Sure, that'd be fine.
Okay, okay, let me do that. Share screen one more time. Here we go. And Carola, do I have this correctly noted?
That's, sorry, I didn't hear that.
Is this your piece?
I don't see it at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Can everybody see it?
Let me do that again.
There we go. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you so much. I appreciate that little nudge. That's what I needed. There we go. So here, I believe, is your first piece.
That's correct. Yeah. This is one of the pieces that I did. It literally caught my eye. The sunlight was playing on all on the water and the marsh, but also on the dead trees. And I love the highlights of that, the highlights that sort of portray this sculptural piece in nature. I just love the contrast between the dead tree and then the forest behind it and the marsh that's very much alive because it's basically taking over the forest. So this particular piece is called A Periwinkle Perspective. And when I was painting it, I was envisioning the viewpoint from a periwinkle, which is, so it was sort of a low perspective to begin with, but how a periwinkle would experience these changes in its environment. The salt water obviously creates more marsh, and the periwinkles thrive in the marsh. So the salt water is killing the trees, but yet it's creating more of a good environment for the periwinkle. So that was and that's the last piece. It's called Time and Tide. And I was particularly drawn, it was basically painted from photographs because the scene was very fleeting. It was on a cloudy, rainy day where the clouds just opened for a moment and the sunlight came through. And I was just awestruck by the beauty of these sparkles on the water. I don't know if everybody can see that, but there's like little sparkles on the water. And it's, the title Time and Tide refers to the contrast between the fleeting moment of the sparkles that were only there for a very, very short period of time, and the slow moving process of the salt water killing the trees. So it was both the tide and the time that played a role in this particular painting.
Thank you so much for walking us through those pieces. And Elliot, I'll turn that over to you to sort of have a few questions.
Yeah, if anyone has a question about the science, I'm free to answer. If not, I can also ramble. Scientists are good at that.
And I can also start off with a question to get us going. And
I think Karen was trying to raise her hand, maybe.
Oh, yes, Karen. Thank you.
That's okay. Elliot, yes, I was wondering, do the ghost forests occur more on the seaside or the bay side, or is it equal?
I think it's pretty equal. Basically, it's all about proximity to the coast. So if you have some salty water nearby and you're a freshwater tree, you're going to be affected eventually. But I don't think there's much of a difference between the Chesapeake side or the Atlantic side for the Eastern Shore.
Probably more erosions happening on the seaside, I would imagine, with the waves.
Erosion is definitely a part of it, but you don't have to have erosion to get these ghost forests. So the land could be perfectly fine, but the salt water can move through the soil. And so just visually looking at the ground, you probably can't tell that there's saltwater intrusion happening, but seeing the vegetation change, so seeing these dead trees and seeing the other vegetation change is a good visual indicator that there's saltwater intrusion happening. So that's why earlier, Dr. McGlathery talked about these ghost forests being sentinels of climate change. So they let us know that something dramatic is happening in the environment, and they stick around for a long time. So we're able to know, like, okay, saltwater intrusion is happening there. Now I see the same process happening a mile further inland. So I know saltwater intrusion is now happening there. So it's a good indicator of the march of sea level rise and saltwater intrusion inland.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Carol, when did you first start painting the ghost forest? When did you, as Elliot was saying, sort of that progression of ghost forests into the landscape that Karen was asking about as well, when did you first start painting them?
Well, to be honest with you, I wasn't really painting ghost forests at a time. I might have painted a dead tree or two before, but I always thought it was an old tree that just at one point it was its time, you know. So I wasn't really aware of that we had these ghost forests until this project came along, and it really opened my eyes to these effects of climate change as well. As the fact that it's not all doom and gloom, as Elliot says, there's also hope in the sense that nature's resilient, and that where there's trees dying, but there's marsh coming up, and there's a lot of critters that live in the marshes, and so obviously it has to be a balance. We can't lose all of the forests, but it's an interesting, basically it's an interesting concept to just think about nature that way, in terms of that the tree is literally like the roots are growing away from the salt water, trying to get fresh water. So nature is very resilient. It can adapt, and maybe there's trees that can live off of salt water in the future. We don't know this, but it could be. Obviously, we have to do our part too, to conserve nature and not ruin it. But at the same time, life will continue in some form or another.
Thank you. Robert Finley?
Yeah, I had a question for Elliot about the trajectory of this process. Have we, for example, been able to use radiocarbon dating to see when some of this wood has basically died and be able to understand the rate of sea level change, either in combination with tide gauge data, or, for example, have we been able to use repeated sequences of aerial photographs to look at the zonation of the marsh plants, since we know that some plants are high tide upper marsh plants and some are low tide, and they may have different signatures on repetitive aerial photographs. So I'm wondering whether or not that kind of trajectory has been documented, and then trying to project into the future using the existing rates that can be evaluated to know what the outcomes are likely to be as this landscape evolves.
Yeah, it's a great question. It sounds like you were on my dissertation committee, because that's the type of question you would ask me.
I did a dissertation on the South Carolina coast, on a very undeveloped part of the coast where we didn't have trees, but we had marsh peat being exposed in the foreshore as the barrier island prograded over the marsh and killed it.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, I can definitely answer this question, and Dr. Karen Gadan, who is going to flow through next, can answer in much more detail. But so I use satellite imagery to do a lot of this studying. So with satellite imagery, we have images going back to the 1980s. So we can identify ghost forests throughout the Atlantic coast and Gulf of Mexico, and basically do that, see how the system is moving over time. And we've noticed across both coastlines that these coastal forests are retreating pretty rapidly, actually. Recent analysis that I just did showed that if dramatic change doesn't happen, ghost or coastal forests may not exist by the end of the century, basically. And so there's not a lot of time left for this type of ecosystem. And sea level rise and saltwater intrusion are global problems. So there's, as an individual, there's not a whole lot you can do. We need like multinational support for these type of things. And so working with artists like Carola and all the other artists allows us as scientists to not only communicate our work to our scientific brethren, but also communicate our work to the public like you all, and hopefully kind of capture your attention and kind of create a groundswell of trying to get people informed and then involved, and hopefully that leads to some further action. So working with the artists is been very vital in kind of doing that public outreach.
That's great, thank you.
And Catherine McHugh had your hand up, and then Larissa, I'm not sure if we'll get to your question, but we'll try. Catherine?
Thank you. I'm staying off camera. I'm reclining because I have a bit of a back issue this evening. First of all, Carola, the pieces of art, they're just really, really stunning. Yeah, I could just stare at those for hours and just get lost in there. I'm sure the use of light is just beautiful. So thank you for sharing those. I did have a question for you, Elliot, and it's a little bit beyond the sort of eco or ecological considerations here. I'm just curious how much you're finding the saltwater advancement interrupting drinking water supplies for communities.
Yeah, that's another great question. So that's a growing issue in Florida, actually. So a lot of the state of Florida gets its water from the Floridan Aquifer, which is a shallow aquifer, superficial aquifer. And Florida is also, their bedrock is also extremely porous. It's made of limestone. And so because of that, as sea level rises, saltwater pushes further into the aquifer over time. And you have these major cities along the coastline. So you have Miami, Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, that are all drawing their water from this aquifer. So what's happening is the fresh water is depleting, and that fresh water is being replaced by salt water. And now these communities are, in the very near future, going to face real significant challenges with supplying their populations with fresh water. And because Florida is a peninsula, you can't just keep moving your wells where you're extracting the water further inland, because if you're on the Atlantic coast like Miami, you can only go so far before you're in the Gulf of Mexico. And so there's not a lot of space for them to actually put their groundwater wells. And it's a lot of growing concern, and there are already plans about routing fresh water from rivers and streams further upland or further up in the state of Florida down to coastal Florida. So it's a really tricky process.
And thank you so much, Larissa. I apologize. We will make sure you get to ask a question of the next artist and scientist. But Carola, Elliot, thank you so much. I'm going to move you to your next gallery.
I am pleased to introduce now Thelma Peterson, who is a watercolor painter with deep roots on the Eastern Shore. Thelma's paintings focus on the landscapes and people of the Eastern Shore, often highlighting its rich history and culture. She joined this collaboration to share the history of the land through creative mediums. Dr. Cora Baird is the site director of UVA's Coastal Research Center in Oyster, Virginia. When coordinating the site's long-term ecological research program and outreach, she leans on both her training as a coastal ecologist and her upbringing on the seaside of Virginia's Eastern Shore. So I'll go ahead and throw out this opening question, and then Cora and Thelma can discuss Thelma's work and the ghost forests. But the opening question for them that I'll put out is, Thelma, one of the works that you made for this project is called From Verdant to Ashen. And can you share the concept behind that piece and what you were looking to capture with it? And Thelma, also, I have slides of some of your work. If you'd like me to show them, you can just tell me when and I'll share my screen and show them.
That would be wonderful. You can throw them up at any point.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and do that now.
Okay. The painting that you're asking about, Verdant to Ashen, is, it actually was the first picture that I decided to paint. And this is it showing right now. And I had been working with the scientists to learn more about ghost forests, and it was learning and steeping myself in the struggles and the science behind the ghost forest, so that when I went on my first field trip to start going and actually walking through them and getting my photographs and sketches from my paintings, I was very surprised to see such a contrast with so much struggle and death in the ghost forest, to see so much vibrant life. And that's why it caught my eye, because it was such a contrast between struggle and healing. And I wanted to portray this scene of ghost forest to give hope that there is the element of, even though we're losing coastal forests and lands, we have a healthy system coming in to give us hope.
Wonderful. I'll go ahead and go to your next image.
So I can ask a question, and then I would love if anyone else has questions for Thelma, you're welcome to chime in. So after working with the scientists on this and then doing your explorations, what were you hoping to capture in the way that you were portraying the ghost forest? So you mentioned the mixture of sort of ghostliness and fresh green encouraging life. But what were the other major sort of themes or goals that you were hoping would come out of your portrayal?
Well, initially, to be really honest with you, I wasn't sure how I was going to approach my paintings, other than after learning so much about the ghost forest in my mind, I was really thinking I would be painting pictures of a lot of dead trees and trying to make them in a very striking contrast with light, ashen trunks against a dark background. And those were kind of the thoughts I was having going into this. So when I actually got into the different properties and the different areas I went into with ghost forest, there was so much life around that it was really, it softened my heart, I guess. It brought a different level into this project, which had sort of been painted in my mind as something that is such a loss, and it is a loss, but there's so much to be gained too. I saw a lot of life and a lot of color, and when I actually got into the project really seriously and was actually boots on the ground, I really wanted to give these ghost forests a voice. I wanted to give their struggle a voice, and I also wanted to give the new life that was coming in and taking them over a voice. So that became a focus for me.
I feel from the perspective of the person who was helping to coordinate this whole project, we were constantly worried having to do so much of it virtually because of COVID restrictions. It made me worry that we wouldn't have the sort of outcomes, the sort of effects and conversations we were hoping to have. But multiple artists that participated at the beginning were sort of like, there's a bunch of sticks in the marsh. Like, not too sure how I'm going to make this a compelling subject. But then seeing the work that came out of it, yours included, and that point that you just made, to me, that was the most gratifying. If there was a metric of did we have good conversations, was this project successful? I don't think that anyone who walked in thinking that it was just going to be about dead trees and then producing the artwork that came out of this, I don't think we could argue that we didn't have a good dialogue or that it didn't have a great outcome.
I agree.
I think it begs the question though, how did you paint these landscapes prior to your experience with Cora and the VCR project? Was it just coming at things with a new eye, or is the subject matter sort of in the background and hadn't really been a part of your attention?
Well, that's a really great question. I teach watercolor painting often, and one of the things I often tell my students would be, it's your painting. You can put in or take out whatever you want. Just because there's a telephone pole in front of the house you're painting doesn't mean you have to put it there, nor all the wires running to the house. It's your painting. So to answer your question, I would probably say maybe one, I saw them, but maybe my eye didn't jump to the ghost forest as strongly as it would now, knowing what I know. But I also, in the past, have chosen not to make them the focal point of my paintings. They were never on center stage, where each one of my paintings, other than this, where it's really up in your face, my other paintings really still have them as part of the landscape and not the only part of the landscape. So in the past, I probably would not have focused as much on the ghost forest. I might have definitely had their presence in a painting, but like in this painting showing right now, the box tree, I really, even though there was such beauty in the marsh and the water and the loblollies that were still healthy, I really spent a ton of time focusing and painting all the dead trees and the tangle and bramble along the coastline.
It adds a lovely texture. I really appreciate the density of that background.
Thank you. Thank you.
The layers of marsh species that you included, I know among the scientists, there was a ton of appreciation for your clear knowledge and attention to the salt marsh, because, you know, as I mentioned before, you were the only artist who painted any flowers. And actually, I think in the painting of the tree with the birds out on the islands, are those the Salicornia, the pickleweed flowers in the foreground? Can you go to the picture of the birds on the tree out on the beach? The purple in the foreground, are those pickleweed?
No, actually that is just because it's my painting, I wanted to add some more color. So in my shadows, I threw in lavenders and purples and some pinks, but it wasn't a particular anything growing other than in my head.
Well, a bunch of us looked at it and said, oh, it's the little red tips of salicornia, of pickleweed, of sea asparagus.
Well, I guess it could imply that, yes.
Yes, no, it's totally, and there's invasive species in your other painting as well.
Okay.
But that was entirely appreciative.
Thank you.
So if anyone else has questions, you're welcome to jump in.
Cora, I just wanted to ask on your end too, what is it like as a scientist to have this collaboration with Thelma and the artists?
It's great. It was a really great experience in learning to share the way that we see things. So when a scientist is only talking to other scientists, we can sort of let a lot of things go unspoken and not have to go sort of back to fundamentals. And when we were talking with the artists, part of what we did with this is we asked in the beginning, we encouraged everyone to take walks through the ghost forest and take observations. And then we all introduced each other and said, what do you want to know? What are you curious about? What do you see in the ghost forest that you don't know why it's there or what is happening or why it's happening? And the artists just gave us tons of amazing questions, and then having to figure out, how do you explain the things that you see when you've seen them through science? How do you explain them so other people can see them? And then likewise, when we were getting to see some of the early versions of the work that the artists were doing and some of the emerging pieces, getting to see what they picked up on, what they paid attention to, what emerged as themes, it was really interesting to be able to see where their observation was taking them, and their questions also brought that up. So I think that was something, sometimes I've heard people talk about an expert blind spot, and this was a really nice check on the expert blind spot of having to find all those things that start getting tucked away as assumptions and similar, and having to actually unpack them and think about them in more detail.
It's amazing. And Thelma, your work is beautiful.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We have just a minute to a few seconds. Any additional comments, questions? Oh, Paula, sure, go ahead. You're on mute, Paula.
Sorry. Thelma, did you paint from a boat or along the road?
I did not. I do have a boat, and I take a lot of photographs when I'm out in the boat to use for reference. But the medium of watercolor is pretty unforgiving to be painting outside for really long periods of time. Each one of these paintings that I did, especially the two watercolors, took about a week and a half to do each painting. And it doesn't lend itself to be sitting out in a boat or standing outdoors. But I do love to paint on location, but those paintings were not done on location. They were done in my studio from my photographs and sketches. Thank you for your question.
Thelma and Cora, thank you so much for spending time with us here in Gallery C. I will move you along.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for your thoughtful contributions to the conversation tonight. I really appreciate everything that you shared, and I hope that you have been inspired by the conversation that we had and that you're leaving at least as curious as you were when you arrived. For me, the most gratifying part of this collaboration was watching our artists gather enthusiasm about the subject of ghost forests as the forest came alive through the observations and through our scholarly discussions. And then also the raw enthusiasm that emerged from the scientists who are really passionate about studying these areas, the conversation really brought that out in a refreshing way. So the art created in this, to me, much of the art that came out and sort of emerged in this gallery, part of what is so inspiring about it is that it shows these big resilient processes and implications that are quietly playing out behind the scenes of these dead trees. And you can sort of feel the gravity of that in many of the different images. So I hope that part of what comes out of the conversation we had tonight is this idea that the hopeful path forward through climate change includes finding collaborative ways to explore huge, sometimes frightening issues and to help each other understand complex processes that are reshaping our land and our lives. This project gave those of us who were involved a new space in which to ask questions, to make observations, and to exchange ideas with each other in new ways. And I hope that your experience here tonight and in exploring the gallery and the forest on your own has given you new ideas about how we learn about and share our knowledge of our world as it is changing around us in real time. As we depart, I just want to give you one final reminder that this is just the first, tonight's event is the first in a series of events in the Climate Ambition Summit that's being hosted by the Environmental Resilience Institute. So please be on the lookout for the other events that will be happening over the next 2 weeks. And thank you very much for joining us tonight.